The United States has started conducting deportation flights using Air Force planes, including to Guatemala, as the Trump administration begins to implement its immigration policies. U.S. President Donald Trump also ordered 1,500 more military personnel to the border with Mexico, like here on the bridge between El Paso and Ciudad Juarez. It's part of Trump's promise to crack down on immigration. Well, DW's Benjamin Alvarez-Gruber is reporting from the border. He told us what's new about these deportation flights.
That's right. Deportation flights are not new. They happened during the previous administrations of Joe Biden, of Barack Obama. What's different now is that those are military cargo planes, so U.S. Air Force planes that are supporting DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, with these deportation flights. You just mentioned the plane and the flight that was confirmed that happened on Thursday evening with 80 migrants that were here irregularly in the United States that were deported back on this cargo plane to Guatemala City. There is also another plane departure expected later on from San Diego, California. We also heard that there was one deportation flight conducted from Arizona. The White House press secretary said that these deportations have begun, but they have been happening. But that's the big difference. Now, usually ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, uses charter planes. So these are additional planes supporting those efforts and those promises that we also saw by President Trump with those executive orders, executive actions that were announced earlier this week. And the Department of Defense said that they will hand over these planes to support those efforts, with more of these deportation flights also expected in the next couple of days.
So is there more to come then? Are there any more flights of this kind expected?
So we're still waiting of confirmation. There are many actors involved here. So we have DHS, we have Department of Homeland Security, we have also Customs and Border Protection, and of course also the Army that is involved with these deportation efforts. There will be flights, but they also are expected that there will be deportations by bus. Yesterday we visited Ciudad Juarez on the Mexican side, where local authorities are building up tents where they expected thousands of people to arrive there. The big question will now be what will happen to those people and how the Mexican authorities will be able to help not only their nationals, but also people from other countries, from Venezuela, who might need to wait there until they can cross to the United States. So there will be probably more information coming out there. What we heard from Customs and Border Protection is that there is not a limited time frame for these cargo airplanes to keep handing out and continuing with these deportation flights.
Well, thank you so much for your reporting. That is DW's correspondent Benjamin Alvarez-Gruber reporting from Texas near the border with Mexico. Now, dozens of people deported from the U.S. have begun arriving in the Mexican border city of Ciudad Juarez. Trump's executive orders on migration have left thousands in limbo at the U.S.-Mexico border. Many had been waiting months for appointments with U.S. immigration officials. DW's Fernando Mateos Frubeck reports.
My name is Gisela Mendoza. I'm Cuban. I have been here in this shelter for about 2 months already, with a very difficult path, a very difficult journey. I came with 2 children.
Gisela is one of the many people who had traveled to the neighboring border city with an asylum appointment to enter the U.S. But after Trump's inauguration, everything changed. And within days of having the appointment again, we received an email where it was cancelled again. Here we're waiting to see what happens in the hands of God trusting. Desperate.
NGOs in El Paso, Texas, on the U.S. side of the border, agree that the situation is uncertain. The Trump administration's crackdown has cut off almost any legal option for migrants to cross the border.
There's really no pathways to apply for asylum right now or to cross the border to ask for any kind of relief. So people really have to make really hard decisions whether to go back to their countries and be in danger there, stay in Mexico and be in danger there, or try to come over irregularly, which is also very dangerous.
President Trump has promised to deport all unauthorized migrants, and Mexico is already awaiting their return. Here behind me, local authorities are getting ready for the possible arrival of thousands of deported people. On Monday, they started building these giant tents to shelter all the migrants that might arrive in the next days. According to the Mexican government, they can hold thousands of individuals. However, local NGOs doubt that Ciudad Juárez can support so many people for long.
Precisamente esto, ¿no? Que no hay muchas organizaciones como con...
There are many humanitarian organizations here, but not enough to meet the demand. It is difficult to take an asylum case without legal representation and limited access to services.
For now, thousands of migrants hoping to reach the US will remain in limbo. They face an uncertain future as these new policies take hold.
Laura Mukherjee is the director of the Immigrant Rights Clinic at Columbia Law School in New York. Welcome to DW. So Trump is sending more troops to the border of Mexico, 1,500 more troops. What does he actually intend for them to do there?
It is unclear what the troops are going to do at the border. The president wants them to stop migrants and asylum seekers from entering the United States. There are major legal questions about whether the president can order the military to the southern border to carry out what is effectively domestic law enforcement. There are laws that constrain what the president can do with troops, and I anticipate that we will see legal challenges filed to the president's actions.
And another one of the steps that Trump is taking to suspend, what he's doing is suspending refugee settlements in the U.S., and that's including those who've already received permission to travel to the U.S. Does this appear to be temporary, or is the Trump administration here really wanting to end the idea that the U.S. is a sanctuary for people fleeing persecution?
On Monday, the president signed an executive order that would suspend refugee processing in the United States for at least 4 months. It remains to be seen whether refugee processing will re-effectuate and continue under the Trump administration. Regardless of what the executive order says, President Trump has already sent a signal throughout immigrant communities here in the United States and throughout the world as well that the United States is no longer a beacon of hope, a place where refugees and asylum seekers from around the world can come to seek safety and protection.
And while Biden was still president, Joe Biden, his administration had a program that allowed around 500,000 people so far from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. It allowed them to fly to the U.S. for 2 years so that they could apply for asylum in the U.S. Trump has now canceled that program, but the 500,000 people are still here, are still there in the U.S. So do we have any idea what's going to happen to them at this point?
It remains to be seen what will happen with this population of individuals. Some of them may have already filed for asylum and other forms of humanitarian immigration protection, which means that they should be entitled to stay in the United States while their cases are adjudicated in the U.S. immigration system. It's a process that can take years. For individuals who have not yet filed for forms of humanitarian immigration relief, I would urge them to consult with an immigration attorney and to do so as soon as possible if they are eligible to do so. For folks who do not have forms of humanitarian immigration relief available to them, they may be more vulnerable to raids and deportations. This remains to be seen.
As you mentioned earlier, a lot of immigration policy is actually local. And some Democratic leaders in cities have, they call their cities sanctuary cities. They've stood up to Trump's anti-immigration policies. And he's gone after them personally in this latest crackdown. Can you first explain to viewers what a sanctuary city is, and also whether or not Trump actually has the power to force these officials to clamp down on immigration if they don't actually want to do that?
Sure. So a sanctuary city or a sanctuary jurisdiction is any locality or state that refuses to comply with federal immigration priorities to the fullest extent. That said, being in a sanctuary jurisdiction does not protect a person from being subject to an ICE raid. Immigration officers can still come into a sanctuary city or a sanctuary state to carry out raids, arrests, detentions, and even deportations. Now, on Monday, the president signed an executive order that would massively limit the amount of funding that can be received by sanctuary jurisdictions from the federal government. A version of this executive order was signed by the president 8 years ago. That executive order from that time faced myriad legal challenges in court and was partially enjoined so that sanctuary jurisdictions did continue to receive federal funding. The federal government simply cannot coerce, commandeer local law enforcement agencies to carry out federal immigration priorities. That is at odds with a central constitutional principle called anti-commandeering, which prevents the federal government from forcing local law enforcement to carry out its priorities.
Okay, Laura Mukherjee from Columbia Law School, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
As promised, Donald Trump started his second term as U.S. president by signing a raft of executive orders as part of a crackdown on immigration. And with a sweep of his pen this week, he left thousands of Afghan refugees in limbo. Their chance of reaching the U.S. taken away after the suspension of a resettlement program. Well, thousands of Afghans are currently waiting in Pakistan to be approved for the scheme, with many now fearing they could be sent home and back into the hands of the Taliban.
Afghan families in Pakistan gather to send a message to Washington. They're stunned that their visa applications are among those that have been suspended. They're appealing for an exemption. My request is to the newly elected President of the United States. Mr. Trump, for God's sake, listen to us. Our patience has run out. We've lost everything. Their visa for Pakistan is only temporary, and they can't get work permits. In Afghanistan, the Taliban see them as traitors. Under their iron rule, an unknown number of Afghans have been attacked, killed, or simply disappeared because they worked for US or NATO forces or the previous Western-backed government. The Taliban swept back into power within days in August 2021. It followed the US military's rapid and chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan and triggered panic among many ordinary Afghans. Desperate scenes at Kabul airport highlighted the fear felt by many at the prospect of renewed Taliban rule. Thousands tried to board military planes belonging to the US and other NATO members. Huge numbers made it, but many more didn't. Most fled to Pakistan, following advice from the US authorities.
The day that we left Afghanistan, the USCIS had sent us an email that you should leave Afghanistan as soon as possible. In any way, you can do it illegally or legally, it doesn't matter, but you should get to a third country, and we will process your case and you will be soon in America.
These Afghans in Islamabad are attending English classes. At least 15,000 are waiting in Pakistan for resettlement in the US. Washington promised that Afghans who had worked for the US military and NGOs would be granted asylum.
I just wanted to tell them respectfully that we have helped you and now we expect help back from you. That's it.
Their status in Pakistan is uncertain. Islamabad has deported hundreds of thousands back to Afghanistan over the past year or more. They're desperately hoping to avoid the same fate.
And joining me now from Modesto in Northern California, we have Spojmi Nasiri, an immigration lawyer who's been representing Afghan clients since the fall of Kabul in August 2021. Thank you so much for taking the time. First of all, just tell us what the suspension of this resettlement program actually means for Afghan refugees who are hoping to reach the U.S.
Thank you for having me. First and foremost, the stopping of the refugee program by the executive order given by Trump administration has been catastrophic for Afghans here who have been desperately waiting for years to be reunited with their family members or were left behind.
And this is an executive order by Trump, isn't it? Do you think it's likely to be challenged in court?
So in the first round, when we had the similar executive order, there were challenges to it, but unfortunately it stayed until the new administration under the Biden came in. So we do foresee being challenges to the not only this executive order, but many of the other orders that have been put in place. We'll have to see how it gets litigated. But in the meantime, unfortunately, Afghans will have to stay put and figure out how to move forward with their lives wherever they're at, in hopes that they were going to, migrate legally through the system, through the process. And there's been a lot of heartache and concern about their safeties.
Now, we've just also heard about Afghan refugees in Pakistan who went there on the advice of U.S. authorities while fleeing from the Taliban. They've been asking to have their stays extended in Pakistan while their futures do remain in limbo. Are you optimistic that that will happen?
Unfortunately, I'm not that optimistic with the conditions and the political turmoil between the government of Pakistan and Afghanistan. There have been a lot of contention. As you and your viewers are aware, millions of Afghans were sent back in the last few years from the Pakistani government. So my clients and clients from all of my colleagues are having extreme difficulties in keeping their clients in Pakistan and also to remain there for the duration. Keep in mind, we don't know how long this executive order will be in place, and to get a continued extension is going to be difficult for many Afghans, not only in Pakistan, but elsewhere also.
Tell me a little bit more about the people who you work with, the people who you represent. Who are these people who are trying to come to the United States?
So over the course of not only 2021, but over the course of the last 15 years as an immigration attorney, I've represented Afghans from every spectrum of family members of U.S. citizens, lawful permanent residents, and also all of those Afghan allies with the U.S. government who have escaped the Taliban regime in hopes of, rightfully and legally through the system have gone through the process to be able to migrate to the U.S. With the fall of Kabul in 2021, I had the opportunity to provide legal services to 7 of the 8 military bases, and many of these family members are spouses, young children, and many of them were also separated at the airport during the chaotic evacuation in 2021. So these individuals who are seeking to migrate were, majority of them, allies of the U.S. government, and some family members were lucky to get out, and then the rest of them were either separated or they remained in Afghanistan in the hopes that they would be joining their families. My clients, I have young children who are separated from their mothers, who are suffering extreme trauma, emotional, psychological trauma, because they are separated. I had a client just last week who said, my son is not doing well. I need his mother here. And this is before the executive order that was issued. So the clients come from every aspect of the community that were allies and deserve to be here and counted on being here through the system that was put in place.
And as allies of the United States, what risks are they facing in Afghanistan under the Taliban?
Well, we get stories for different risks in terms of their safety, their family members. Many of those allies who are here, particularly the male figures who were, supporting the U.S. government as translators, as other means, their families are at risk in terms of, some of them have to move from place to place for protection. Some of them have been harassed. Some of them have been told, we know your family's in the U.S., and questioned about that. So many have questions not only about the safety, and then others who may not face such hardship and issues, but have a right to be reunited with their families because their loved ones served with the U.S. government in some capacity.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. That is Spajmi Nasiri joining us from Modesto.
Thank you very much for having me.